Hi there, welcome to the Schwowin's Nest. My name is Sandra. Today I'm participating in a spring bee collab. More info on that later. Let's get crafting. For my first project, I'm taking this cutting board that is bamboo, but I had already given it a couple of coats of white paint. A little bit of the yellow from the bamboo came through, so I'm just going to give it one more coat of white chalk paint. I'm using some of these tumbling tower blocks from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to just glue them the way you see me having them set out here, 3 along the bottom and 2 on each side. And what that's going to do is allow me to create a little bit of a pocket at the bottom of the cutting board. Using some jute rope, I'm going to start by gluing it on the one side of this board at the bottom, and I'm going to make sure I have glue on the board and on the tumbling tower block. And I'm going to hold that in place and make sure that it sets, because what I want to do is then pull it around to the other side and glue it the same way. I also put a little dab of glue on the top of each of the blocks here, just so I could pull the rope nice and tight. I didn't want to have any wobbliness of the rope happening. And now I'm going down the other side and gluing it the same way I did the first one. Then once that is dry, I'll cut off the excess and start over. After I put the second piece of rope on, I found that the rope was still kind of caving in a little bit, and I wasn't able to glue it to itself very well. It wasn't holding very well. So I'm cutting out a piece of cardboard and I'm going to slide that in between the tumbling tower blocks. I'm going to glue that in place, and then I'm going to be gluing the rope on top of that. And that's just going to make the rope have a little bit more structure. Now I'm going to continue adding the rope, gluing it onto the cardboard, and going all the way up to the top of the tumbling tower blocks. Once I got to the top, I needed to add a couple more pieces of rope. The cardboard had already been used up, so I'm just gluing the rope on top of itself. Then I'm going to cut off the end and fold that in to cover up the tumbling tower block, and you won't even notice that it's there. I did one more piece just to make sure that you couldn't see any of the tumbling tower blocks. And then I'm going to start working on filling up the bottom portion. To make the pocket look more like a bee skep, I'm going to use some more jute rope and glue it in a circle. Then I'm going to outline it one more time, so I'll have actually 2 circles. It'll just be a double circle. Then I'm going to take some black paint and paint the inside of the circle so it looks like the hole where the bees would go in. I designed this little bee image and printed it off on tissue paper, and now I'm going to use Mod Podge to apply it to the board. If you're interested in learning how to print on tissue paper, I have a tutorial linked down in my description box. I like using my brush to pick up my image if it's not too big, and it just gives me a little bit more control about where I'm going to place it. I'm starting from the inside and working my way out, making sure that my brush is nice and moist with Mod Podge. If it's too dry, I risk tearing the tissue paper. And of course, no project of mine would be complete without some distressing. So I just have this chip brush and I've put it in a little bit of black paint. And now I'm just going to run it across the edges and the top here, going right over the bee image to give it more of an old weathered look. I'm going to add a piece of jute rope to the top and some beautiful tulips inside my pocket. And I think this turned out really pretty. So let me tell you a little bit about this spring bee collab that I'm part of today. It is hosted by DIY from House to Home with co-host Kiki DIYs. We've got Lori Bly DIY, myself, DIY with Nadia. Then there's Crafty Leanie, David Owen Creates, A Perfect Place to Start, MB Gray Designs and Designer's Loft. I'm so honored to be part of this group of wonderful creators. So when you're done watching my video, go down to my description box, click on the link to the playlist, and you'll be able to view everyone else's videos and see what they came up with. I'd love it if you could hit that red subscribe button for all of my fellow creators and support the growth of their channel too. I found this adorable lamp that looks just like a honey pot at the thrift store. It was $6.99. So I gave it one coat of my matte clear finish just to get rid of some of the shine to help my chalk paint stick. Now I'm using Folk Art Home Decor chalk paint in the color sheepskin, and it's kind of just a nice off-white color. I really like it. I did end up giving this a good 2 coats, and I had to do a little bit of a touch-up because that blue was fairly dark. But I'm really loving how this is turning out so far. I looked this up when I came home, and it was part of a Winnie the Pooh lamp. This would have been his honey jar, and it didn't have the shade. So without the shade, the bottom part of the lamp really wasn't worth too much, so I didn't feel bad painting it. I also ended up taking the hardware out completely. I ended up painting everything, but then I decided that this little part at the top needed a little bit something extra. So I'm going to glue on this half bead, and then I'm going to use some brown antique wax and go over both this sort of knob part and the little bead to make it look like a wood top. So after it was all dry, I decided that I needed to fill in this little indentation here. I didn't want it to be a cutesy little pot, otherwise I could have just filled in the word honey and made it look really sweet, but I wanted to give it more of an older vintage kind of look because that's my style. So I'm just using a popsicle stick and some of my favorite spackle, which is Dry Dex spackle that goes on pink and then dries white so you know it's ready to be sanded. To make sure I don't have too many lumps and bumps, I'm using the popsicle stick and dragging it across the whole surface, making sure that the popsicle stick comes in contact with the top and bottom ridges, and that's just going to make it fill in nice and smooth. I really love using this spackling because when you go over it with sandpaper or a sanding block like I'm using here, the dust doesn't fly around. It literally just falls down onto your table or cardboard or whatever you're using. I'm just going to smooth this out really gently because it's very easy to get heavy-handed with this and just literally sand it all off. So I'm just going to go very lightly with a fine grit sandpaper. Using some antiquing wax, I'm just using a small chip brush and dry brushing into that label area. I wanted to add a little bit of the brown so it would connect with the knob at the top. I also printed off a little label on tissue paper, and now I'm going to apply it to the label portion of this little pot. This time, instead of putting the Mod Podge on the pot, I put it on the back of the tissue paper because I didn't want to wipe off any of that antique wax. I also printed off some bees. Now these bees I got from Creative Fabrica, and that is a website that has tons of graphics and SVG files and background papers and all sorts of things. I do have that link down in my description box too, but I will have all of these graphics available on my website as free printables for you to download and use on your own projects. I added 3 bees, but you could definitely add more if that's what you would like. The last thing I'm going to do is just add a little shoestring bow just with some regular twine and use some Aleene's tacky glue just to glue it down onto the knob. If you are new to my channel, perhaps coming over from the playlist, welcome! I'm so glad you're here. If you like what you see, I would love it if you could hit that red subscribe button and support the growth of my channel. For this project, I'm starting off with 2 of these wooden bookends that came from the thrift store. I'm going to trim off that knob at the top because it's just not the right shape. Then I trimmed away some of the red felt because it was just sticking out too much. Now I'm going to take a styrofoam ball and glue it onto the top of each of these bookends. I'm going to use the same sheepskin color and just paint all of the bookend. I originally left the rounded portion that I'm holding in my hand, and I thought I would be able to cover it really well with just the black chalk paint and the yellowy chalk paint, but I ended up just going over everything with this sheepskin color. It just gave it more of a uniform look. I'm sure you've already guessed that I'm making bees out of these bookends. So the first ridge down at the bottom, I painted that black. I'm going to skip the next ridge and then continue on painting a black stripe as you see me doing here. I've got about a 1/2 inch brush, maybe less than that, and it's an angled brush, and I'm letting the brush do the majority of the work. I'm just going to spread it out, and that's the thickness I'm going to use for my stripes. So here they are, painted with the black and yellow stripes. I didn't think you needed to see me doing all of this painting because it was very time consuming, but I think it was worth the effort. What I'm doing now is taking some of the brown antique wax and just going over the black portion because I wanted to kind of make it more of an antique look, and it really did turn out nice. I love the look of the brown wax or brown wash on top of black. Now I'm just very gently going to do the same thing with the yellow, just giving it more of a dry brushed look so it looks more old and weathered. I'm doing the same thing, just kind of dry brushing and wiping in the antiquing wax, just so both of the pieces look like they belong together. Using some plastic poster board from Michaels, I cut out some wing shapes. Now I used my Cricut Joy to do this, and that's simply because I have a really hard time cutting things anymore. My hands don't work as well as they used to. But you could definitely just cut these out with scissors, and you could use cardstock, you could use cardboard, whatever you happen to have on hand. I'm giving them a distressed look with the antiquing wax as well, just so it blends in a little bit better. Now, because these are plastic, I decided to use Aleene's Tacky Glue to glue them onto the wood because I didn't want to take the chance that the plastic would melt from the hot glue. Once I had the wings placed where I wanted them, I used a piece of painter's tape just to hold them in place while the glue had a chance to dry. The last thing I did was add some little wire antennas, and those were really easy. Just cut off a piece of wire and poke them into the head of the bee. And I think this is absolutely beautiful. You'll have to let me know what you think of my quirky little bee bookends. Since this is a spring bee themed collab, I thought I would show you how I make some bead bees. Say that a few times fast. Anyhow, I'm just using different sizes of beads, a large one for the body and a small one for the head. The color I used for my bees was just a mix of white and just regular yellow acrylic paint, and I just blended it until I got the color I wanted. I put them on skewers to make them a little easier to paint. Then I added some little wings out of the plastic poster board and some wire antennas. These are just adorable. I hope you enjoyed my bee-themed projects today and got some inspiration to get crafting yourself. Don't forget to click the playlist link in my description box and check out what all the other creators have made. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.